Jesus, you'll be talking about sequential and then close linking devices. So go ahead. Thank you.
No, thank you. So, okay, well, hi again. Okay, so this time I will be presenting something related to my research, to my dissertation. And well, as can be observed on the slide, the title of my talk is Sequential and then Close Linking Devices. Okay, so yes, as I mentioned before, this is part of my dissertation, which is concerned with temporal adverbial clauses in cross-linguistic perspective. And well, in my dissertation, I am exploring when clauses, why clauses, after clauses, before clauses, and also until clauses. And well, and then devices are situated in the chapter concerned with after clauses, that is temporal subsequence. And well, okay, so the following is the outline of today's talk. Well, obviously, first of all, I will provide some general introduction to the topic, and then I will explain the goals of today's talk. And these goals, well, are two main goals. The first one is to explain extremely briefly.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you please put your screen on presentation mode?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I forgot to do it. Okay, much better, right?
Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So, okay, in today's talk, I will concentrate on two main diachronic sources of indent devices. These are demonstratives and also verbs meaning to finish. And I will explain that it seems likely that in certain macro areas, languages, speakers of specific languages have copied these indent devices, but by means of native material. This is some sort of pattern replication. Well, I will explain more about that in a moment. And the second goal of today's talk is concerned with the decision-making process. That is, in many languages of the sample, there is more than one indent device used to express temporal subsequence. And I will try to formulate certain hypotheses concerned with what are the factors that lead speakers to choose one indent device over the other one. What are the factors that lead speakers in this decision-making process? And at the end, I will provide some final remarks. Okay, so the introduction. So it is very important to mention that most typological research on the diachronic origin of clause linking devices have concentrated for the most part on adverbial subordinators, coordinators, converbs. Other studies have paid close attention to the diachronic origin of clause linking devices expressing specific types of adverbial relations, such as condition and purpose. However, unlike these clause linking devices that I mentioned before, indent devices have not received much attention in the literature. Well, to the best of my knowledge, the following are three broad cross-linguistic studies that have explored this diachronic origin of indent devices. The first one is Bourdin's study, based on a sample of 64 languages, and he mentions that the grammaticalization of verbs meaning to come and go, these motion verbs, seems to be very common in indent devices in African languages. The second study that I would like to bring to your attention is Lichtenberg's study, and he's concentrated for the most part on Oceanic languages. And finally, we have Frasinger's study based on Chadic languages, and he mentions that the grammaticalization of commutative case markers is very common that is, commutative case markers tend to grammaticalize into indent devices in Chadic languages. Now, the goals. So the first one obviously is to explore the most common diachronic sources of indent devices in a sample of 88 languages. And the question here is, which syntactic categories do the world's languages most frequently draw upon in the formation of indent devices? So as I mentioned before, certain typological studies mention that, okay, motion verbs meaning to come and to go tend to grammaticalize into indent devices. And also commutative case markers also tend to grammaticalize into indent devices. So the question is there more to the story? Are there any other diachronic sources? Well, I already mentioned it when I presented the outline. It was some sort of a spoiler alert. And well, yes, there seems to be other diachronic sources of and then devices, such as verbs meaning to finish and also demonstratives. And I will explain more about that in a moment. And finally, to explore the decision-making process. I will explain more about this. And well, before getting started with the diachronic sources of and then devices, it is very important to bring to your attention the following typological properties of and then devices. So what are and then devices? Well, and then devices are coordinating morphemes that are specifically used to express temporal subsequence, as can be observed in the example in 1 from Bilua. So we have this T. Now, another important typological property, well, cross-linguistic property of and then devices is that they tend to appear in clauses that follow an iconic order. That is, the situations encoded in these clauses are represented in the order in which they occur in real life. And all languages having these and then devices do not allow the order of the clauses to be changed. So for instance, in this example in 1, the second clause cannot appear at the beginning of in this kind of construction. So that's something important to keep in mind about and then devices. And another property, and the last one that I would like to mention here, is that and then devices tend to link clauses that appear with the same properties as main clauses. That is, if we look carefully at example in 1, you observe that these clauses have the very same properties as main clauses. There is no indication of subordination. So these are some of the properties of and then devices. Now, what about the diachronic sources of and then devices attested in the sample? So the first one is demonstratives. So in the present study, 42 languages in the database have and then devices that have been derived from demonstratives, meaning that. So interestingly, in various languages of the sample, demonstratives used to express these temporal subsequence relation are only weakly grammaticalized. What is this? It means that these demonstratives still appear with some kind of nominal properties, and therefore these items should be considered items not yet fully grammaticalized. That is, they are still in the process of becoming these and then device. Now, the question here at this point is, why do speakers of many languages around the world employ demonstratives as and then devices? Well, there seems to be some kind of cognitive connection here between these demonstratives and also and then devices. And this can be explained by frequent use of devices referring to space to time. And well, demonstratives in this case develop in many languages around the world these course-deictic use in which they refer anaphorically to the adjacent clause or situation. And that's maybe the possible diachronic explanation why we find demonstratives being grammaticalized as and then devices. Now, this is very interesting because there are languages in the database in which and then devices are formed from a demonstrative plus an ablative case marker. This is only attested in South American and Australian languages in the present study. And for instance, in the example in 2 from Aymara, we observed that this and then device is composed of this demonstrative plus the ablative case marker. And what about Australian languages? Well, we have the example in 3 from Guinigandi, in which this and then device is composed of a demonstrative plus an ablative case marker. Now, with respect to Australian languages, well, I decided why not? And I start looking at many Australian grammars of Australian languages. And it seems to be that many languages have this very same and then device composed of a demonstrative plus an ablative case marker. So many of these languages are not genetically related. And well, it seems to be probably the case that speakers of these languages may have copied the pattern, but by means of native material. This is some sort of pattern replication. And my plan is to return to this type of study in more detail in the future. But for the moment, it is necessary to point out that this is something that occurs in Australian languages. And well, what about the second diachronic source? Well, this is concerned with verbs meaning to finish. So in 32 languages of the sample, we have and then devices derived from verbs meaning to finish. So interestingly, again, in various languages of the sample, these verbs meaning to finish are only weakly grammaticalized. What is this? So if you observe carefully the example in 4 from Tamambo, we have that the verb meaning to finish appears with this verbal property, that is the person marker, the third person marker mo, but it can also occur with other person markers, which seems to indicate that this device, this verb is still weakly grammaticalized because it can still appear with other person markers. And well, the question here again, why do speakers of many languages around the world employ verbs meaning to finish as and then devices? So one possible explanation to this is found in Kuteva. So she mentions that this grammaticalization pathway seems to be an instance in which process verbs are grammaticalized to markers used to structure narrative discourse. And that's one possible explanation for this. And well, something else that I would like to mention, that I would like to add about and then devices, about verbs meaning to finish grammaticalized into and then devices, is that this phenomenon seems to be pervasive in Oceanic languages. So this is a study that I conducted recently, and it seems to be the case that verbs meaning to finish used as and then devices are attested in languages spoken in Vanuatu, New Caledonia, the Solomon Islands, and many others. But, well, as for Oceanic languages spoken in Vanuatu, they may have copied the use of verbs meaning to finish from Bislama. So in Bislama, temporal subsequence is indicated by the verb meaning, by a verb meaning to finish. So it seems to be the case that these Oceanic languages copy this pattern from Bislama. Now, further evidence comes from the following aspect. So most Oceanic languages spoken in Vanuatu employ this verb meaning to finish to express not only temporal subsequence, but also these verbs meaning to finish appear in tail-head linkage constructions. What is this? Let me give you the following example so that you can have a clearer idea of what I am talking about. So suppose that I give you the following sentence. I felt sick, I went to the hospital. After I went to the I felt sick, I went to the hospital. After I went to the hospital, I felt much better. In this case, I am repeating the propositional content of the previous clause by verbatim repetition. So interestingly, Bislama also employs these verbs meaning to finish in tailhead linkage construction, tailhead linkage constructions, as can be observed in the example in 5. So we have that the verb swim is repeated in another part of the construction, and then it appears with this verb meaning to finish. So this is something again that I would like to address in more detail, but it's important to mention it here. That the fact that languages may have copied this pattern by means of native material. That is, speakers of Oceanic languages spoken in Vanuatu didn't copy exactly the verb meaning to finish, but rather by means of native material, they copy the very same pattern that is found in Bislama. At least this is probably what is occurring here. And well, now I would like to address briefly the decision-making process. What is this? So in usage-based approaches, you know that there is common ground in auditory design. These are important cognitive processes that are of social cognition. So in order to communicate, obviously, speakers have to have this kind of common ground. That is, they have to have this awareness of shared knowledge. And well, common ground obviously provides the basis for auditory design. And by auditory design, this is the process where speakers unconsciously have to identify, okay, this is the physical situation, this is the particular context. Speakers have to evaluate different options in the communicative scenario in order to choose the appropriate structure to express a communicative function. So in this particular case, auditory design is what I am talking about. And well, various languages of the sample have more than one and-then device used to express temporal subsequence. And the question here is, what is the role of common ground in auditory design? That is, what are the factors that may play a role in the decision-making process of the speakers? So that's something that I would like to mention briefly in the following slides. So probably one factor that is going to lead speakers to choose one device over the other one is because in many languages of the sample, I will not provide the numbers for the sake of time and space as well. But well, in various languages of the sample, there are languages may have two devices and then devices. One of them is used to express a same subject situation, and the other one is used to express a different subject situation. And for instance, in the example in 6, knock is used to express some sort of same subject situation, and sa is used to express a different subject situation. And therefore, this may be one factor that may influence speakers' choices of one device over the other one. Another factor, this is also attested in various languages of the sample, in particular in languages spoken in PNG. And this is illustrated in Barupu. In Barupu, you have these and-then devices that are used depending on whether the action is carried out in the very same scene or there is some change of scene. And for instance, in 12, you observe the ja, it's used when there is some sort of, when the action of the first clause is gonna be carried out in the very same scene. On the other hand, in 13, we observe that kope is used when the situation occurring in the first clause changes of scene. The second clause, the situation of the second clause is carried out on a different scene. And obviously, this may be another factor that may influence speakers' choices of these devices. Well, there is another factor, and this is concerned with expected and unexpected situations, and this is illustrated by Bilua. In 14, this ta is used to express some sort of unexpected situation, sorry. And the example in 15 is used to express this, and then device is used to express some sort of expected event or situation. And finally, we have, this is attested in various African languages of the sample and also languages spoken in PNG. And these languages may have different types of and-then devices, but these and-then devices are going to be employed depending on the amount of time between situations. Some of them are going to be used in order to express this immediate temporal subsequence. So this action finished and then immediately another one occur, and some others are gonna show more fine-grained temporal situations. And probably this is another factor that is gonna lead speakers to choose one device over another one. And well, with respect to the final remarks,
we have to finish up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so not only motion verbs and commutative case markers seem to be common diachronic sources, but also verbs may need to finish and demonstratives. And well, I also hopefully show you that languages may have more than one and then device. And in this particular case, there are different factors that are going to lead speakers to choose one device over the other one. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting talk. Okay, so we have one question in the Q&A. Do you see it?
Let me see. Yes. Okay. Should I read it? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, read it.
Okay. Do you happen to know if these diachronic grammaticalization processes are attested in sign languages? Ooh, interesting question. Would your story look similar if demonstratives and finished verbs were not found to evolve into and-then devices in these languages? For the decision-making audience design part of the story? That's a very interesting question. It seems to me that that's the following step. Try to analyze these and-then devices in sign languages and try to see if this story holds, because honestly, I have no idea at the moment. And well, obviously this is gonna require to to work with other experts on sign languages. And let's see if the story holds. If the story that I told you today holds for sign languages, but who knows? But yes, but thank you for bringing this to my attention. It's very, very important.
Okay, we have time for a couple of more questions.
I see Yotam. Yes.
My question was, I noted that when you showed the list of end-to-end devices in Australian languages, you had some items there that were really, really long. I'm thinking about the profile of usage in Hebrew of Feaz, which is very, very common. I mean, saying and then you show things with like 4 syllables. How could these be repeatedly used in narrative? They must have a different usage profile. Or I don't know. I really, but I was wondering about that.
Yeah, that's something very interesting and something that I plan to return in the future. Hopefully, in the next couple of months because of the summer. But yes, these Australian languages have these very long and-then devices. They are not only composed of ablative and demonstratives, but also they appear with third-person markers such as it, and they also appear with some sort of tense aspect mood values, in particular perfective or past markers. And they also appear, my recollection, don't quote me on this, but they also appear with this, what is the other marker? Honestly, I do not remember the other marker, but those are the first one that came to my mind. And that's why it's very, very long device that you have in Australian languages. So not only ablative and demonstrative, but also other small components of these and-then devices. But again, it would be very interesting to see to what extent speakers have copied these patterns by means of native material. I don't know.
Interesting. Thank you.
No, thank you. Jack, I guess.
Yeah.
Good to see you, Jack.
Thank you, Jose, for a very interesting talk. Just to follow up on that last question, I think it is intriguing that there are these very long cases of and-then markers. I'm thinking of, just to add to that, for a number of Mesoamerican languages, you have long elements that are stacked on top of each other. So you have a borrowing from Spanish and a native word, like in Zacapultec Maya, tons tigara. So probably a demonstrative kind of thing, plus a borrowing from Spanish entonces. Both are used. So there we get up to 4 syllables there. The native word is 3 syllables. Add the Spanish, we get 4 syllables. Now, why might that not be such a strange thing to do? I think one thing worth looking at is that I suspect that very often these occur as separate intonation units in their own right. And the reason for that would be what Wally Chafe called a episode boundary. Okay, so a boundary between two separate episodes where you're doing a whole scene change. And so I think very often you have a situation where you need to sort of initialize a whole new cognitive frame, maybe a new setting, new actors, or, you know, that event was finished, now let's start a whole new event.
Yeah.
And so this suggests to me, first of all, it'd be interesting to look at prosody here. Second, you might want to distinguish or divide your cases, your and-then cases, into sort of a clause medial or clause internal.
Oh, I see.
You know, the ones that are basically grammaticizing into a go in order to do X, or something where it's more integrated. So you may have 2 very different kinds of things going on here.
Yeah.
So that might be something to look at.
I'm sorry, I think we don't have time for